Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Laurie, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Sure. I'm Laurie Calhoun. I've authored a few books. The one we're discussing today is We Kill Because We Can, From Soldiering to Assassination in the Drone Age. My anti-war book before that was called War and Delusion, and it's a criticism of the just war tradition and how it's been turned into an apparatus of propaganda for promoting wars rather than deciding whether wars are just or unjust.
So how'd you get started in this certain area? It's not exactly a happy topic.
You mean drones in particular or war?
Just war.
War in general. Okay. Yeah, it started back when I was in graduate school at Princeton in philosophy. You were non-existent at that point, but the 1991 Gulf War was being drummed up by George H.W. Bush. And I didn't really understand what was going on, so I watched all the congressional proceedings about it. And my conclusion was there's actually no reason for us to go to war. And I was really in the minority at that time. It was a very big propaganda campaign to get everyone on board with the war. So nearly everyone in this country supported it. There were the yellow ribbons and everything. And I wrote, very scathing letters to editors in newspapers and an op-ed in the student paper at Princeton. And then after the war, Princeton gave George H.W. Bush an honorary PhD, which was totally abhorrent to me. I couldn't believe it, supposedly because he constantly parroted the tropes of just war theory. So after that, I kind of settled down for a while, did my own philosophy. I did philosophy of science, epistemology, sort of meta philosophy is more my thing rather than stuff that's on the ground. But then came along Bill Clinton, and he bombed Kosovo. And that was the day I started writing essays on war in earnest. So that was in March 1999. My first essay was published that year. And then I just wrote essay after essay about that ever since. And mainly it's just that I feel that there's no need for us to be killing all these people abroad for whatever our particular geopolitical aims are. And I feel like there's a lot of deception going on in persuading people to support these efforts. So that's how it started. And with the drone piece in particular, I was really appalled when I saw the film clip of a drone strike in Yemen on November 3rd, 2002. I saw it on TV5, a French news network. And it struck me that this is really frightening, that we just destroyed this car that had 6 people who were said by our government to be terrorists driving down a road in Yemen. And all that was left was a mangled chassis. You couldn't actually tell who the people were, how many people were there. And I was like, this is really frightening. First of all, we're not even at war in Yemen. And we just killed a group of people on the assumption that they were guilty of something or other. And so then I wrote an essay called The Strange Case of Summary Execution by Predator Drone, because this struck me as flying in the face of everything we supposedly stand for as a modern Western democratic liberal state. So supposedly we believe in due process, we believe in indicting people for crimes and trying them, and habeas corpus. We believe supposedly in all these principles, but we just wiped these people off the face of the earth on the basis of some, intelligence gathered by people who wanted to use this technology. So once that started happening, where they were killing people in areas outside conflict, so there were no soldiers on the ground to protect in that case, as there were in Afghanistan and in Iraq, where they also used drones, but it was under a pretext of force protection. Then I started thinking and researching more about this whole idea of just assassinating people at a distance by remote control. And so I ended up writing a whole book on it.
What when it comes to the tactics that I mean, what shocked you the most when it comes to the government's, I guess, excuse to go to war, or when it comes to the public's acceptance of going to war? I had to look into the whole Islamic terrorism. I had to dive all the way down that rabbit hole, and it's much like the same thing of labeling something communist back in the 60s and 70s. It was just a word that ingrains. I mean, if I say the word terrorist, immediately people either assume a certain identity or they immediately just get stricken with fear. And it's kind of like, here, government, here's my fear. Take care of it and do whatever you need to do to make that fear go away. And that's a really big issue, especially with something that we are disconnected with. And we find that with most things that involve other countries, our involvement over there. A lot of times we're given a speech like, learning more about the 60s and 70s has really kind of opened me up. So a lot of my examples might be for back then, but the labeling of communists, the actions and the protocols that were justified as an action of safety or, I guess, cautious measures when it comes to the fear of communism, propaganda that was deployed, and why the public accepted it, and why we think the way that we think have all been, I mean, just it's like being manipulated. It's like being 26 or 25 and finding out Santa Claus isn't real. You're just like, "Wait a minute, this has been 25 years of this." And this is kind of what this whole big lie where I think people assume a certain political party is going to be the one that kind of solves it for there. And I think this is a dangerous thing because I feel like any party's susceptible to, leading down this route. I think there's a large idea where I bring up the cause of just America sitting on the bench for once. I know people want people to be involved in other countries. I think we can help in certain ways when it comes to diplomacy and things of that sort. But there's a large involvement of like Iraq terrorists, go hunt for the weapons, go find it. It's going to come here. And there's this giant scare that starts to happen where I start going, the technology that we're getting now is going to make all these things of going into another country and doing a horrible act or bombing something just because there's going to be casualties, but none of our troops are going to be hurt, is a real fear. And it's going to happen. And we see that now with, I mean, everything's translating over to more of the cyber age. And I know I just tried to sum up both your works in a matter of one question, but there is a large fear out there where I just ask the question, what do you think, like when it comes to the justifications for war, the tactics that the government uses, whether it's media assets or whether it's, I don't know, wrong intel or saying we got intel from abroad that actually never came in. It was just a justification to go over there and do something. Or do you think it's the public that we should probably wise up? Because I blame the public as much as I do the government, only because there's a lot of things that I know we question, but there's also a large reception when it's certain things like terrorism. Justified, you go to war for terrorism or certain actions. And there's obviously people that stand in the way of a lot of those things as well, too. But getting the public in on the discussion of you might be brainwashed.
Well, the problem is, of course, that the media has been completely commandeered by the military at this point. So when you see coverage of a war, you see the perspective of the Pentagon. This was true in 1991 with the Gulf War. They broadcast the war. If you ever have a chance to look at old clips of the news back then, they broadcast the war as though it were a sporting event. There was no blood, there were no bodies. They just showed these beautiful missiles going in and lighting up places in Baghdad. So they've sanitized the coverage of war, so you don't actually see what's going on. So we, during the war on terror, we didn't see the drone strikes that killed groups of civilians. We didn't see that on television. So what you hear instead is the Pentagon PR take on what happened. They say we just killed a group of jihadists who wanted to hurt Americans. That's all you hear, and you don't see the reality on the ground, which is thousands of people protesting because we killed a bunch of kids in a school, etc. So, I mean, it's sort of a long question, but part of the problem is the entire presumption in favor of war was given a huge jolt by the acts of 9/11. So September 11th, 2001, everyone was traumatized by that. Everyone, I mean everyone at every level of society. And the administration took this as an opportunity to just expand the war making apparatus. So we've been at war ever since. It's the endless war now. So Biden is, frequently saying, "Oh, we just killed a bunch of terrorists in Somalia." So why are we killing people in Somalia? So, and the answer is reflexively, "Oh, terrorists, is Islamist extremists. We have to do this constantly," without really examining the consequences of the war on terror, the 20-year war on terror, we left Afghanistan with the Taliban in power. So, what exactly was the consequence, or what were the benefits of our having spent $1 trillion or however many dollars it was in Afghanistan specifically? And how was it that all these new terrorist franchises appeared in places like Syria, Yemen, Pakistan? Well, in fact, we sowed that by enraging people in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they were galvanized to take up arms against us because we killed, their family members and their friends. So instead of analyzing the actual effects of the war on terror, we just plod on as though it's like obvious that this is what we have to do. So the more people we kill, the more people there will be to kill, because we will anger more people, and it just goes on and on and on. To answer your question, whether the public should be more responsible, of course they should, but the problem is they don't have access to the sort of information that they would need. You have to do research to find out about what's going on with the drone program, for example. You have to read some NGO reports and some reports by groups such as Reprieve, who have analyzed the civilian casualties, et cetera, and who have interviewed people on the ground about the effects of lethal drones hovering over their head constantly, and how their kids hope that it's going to be a cloudy day, because on those days there are no lethal drones. So there's all this information, but Americans and people in the West generally don't have access to that because they're busy doing their job. So they have, as you mentioned before, they've delegated all of these decisions to the government. They assume like that's what the government does. The government takes care of us, protects us, and we're going to do our job, whatever it happens to be. If you're a teacher or a nurse or a fireman or whatever your job is, you do that, and the government takes care of everything else. And you just assume that what they say is true. Problem is, there have been many mistakes made, and we only hear about some of them. So you may be aware that on August 29th, 2021, when we were leaving Kabul, on the way out the door, the United States government killed an aid worker and 9 other people, 7 of whom were children, in Kabul. And the whole thing was displayed for the first time. The whole like dynamics of what happened and how this mistake was made was portrayed in a film by the New York Times, which is kind of exceptional because they always supported the drone program for the first 20 years of it. And what happened in this case is they had intel according to which some bad guy driving a white Toyota Corolla was going to bomb the Kabul airport. So they followed this guy in a white Toyota Corolla. He did things like moved things around, visited people all over town, acting suspiciously, right? And then they just took him out with a missile along with 9 other people. And initially, the Pentagon said, "Oh, we, protected our troops attempting to leave the land. We got rid of this, nasty terrorist." But it turned out a few days later that, in fact, the guy was totally innocent, and they had just destroyed 10 innocent people. So the difference in this case and all the previous cases is that we actually had access to an independent narrative about what went on. Usually when the United States killed groups of people in Pakistan, all we got was the official story. So that initial line of how we just wiped out, 40 evil terrorists. We never got the alternative perspective on that because there were no journalists on the ground. It was too dangerous. And the local journalists who tried to combat the Pentagon's narrative were actually listed as terrorist sympathizers, and in some cases imprisoned. So we only got this intel this time because we didn't control the narrative anymore, because we were leaving the country. And so this raises the question, how many of these other drone strikes also killed like actually groups of entirely innocent people? And could that explain perhaps why the war on terror has gone on and has expanded over, many different countries at this point?
Which presidency was the drone strike used the most, and which presidency did it start in?
It started with Bush. The first drone strike outside an area of active hostility was that November 3rd, 2002 drone strike in Yemen, and that was by the Bush administration. The Bush administration did about 50 of those, more or less. That is out, in places where there were no soldiers on the ground to serve as a pretext for force protection. So they did about 50. Obama went a little bit crazy and ramped up the drone program. and he killed thousands of people outside areas of active hostilities. That means in Yemen and Pakistan, places where we didn't really have a troop presence. And his idea was, I think he was somehow seduced by John Brennan into thinking that he'd be a smart warrior if he used drones in this judicious way and managed to protect U.S. soldiers by using more drones and fewer boots on the ground. But he killed thousands of people, and so I think Obama probably used the most drone strikes outside areas of active hostilities. Trump, of course, used them as well. Biden is using them now, but it was Obama who really normalized the practice of assassination at a distance and rebranded assassination as targeted killing. So it's supposed to be an act of war rather than an act of assassination, according to his administration.
Now, is there a way to what would you suggest a method? Would you suggest outlawing drone strikes? Would you trying to get the government ethics board, people that look through the government to check if there's proper ethics being done, they're very, very disconnected. I've had a couple of them on the show talk about certain things, but I've even mentioned, I don't know if you know about the Johnson treatment, about Lyndon Johnson's administration. Google that in your free time. You'll think, wait, that is real? It's very real, very inappropriate things. They used to call them, I hate to say the word, but they used to call them bull balls because he used to get naked in front of reporters. It was a bullying tactic that Lyndon Johnson used, and this is well documented. But I said that to the guy on government ethics, and I go, don't you think the bar was set as a standard for it? Just has been every time the guideline goalpost, it always moves. And that's kind of where we go. So we got to kind of correct this. And he didn't believe me. He said it was a conspiracy. And I sent him the article on it. He was like, wait, it's real. I was like, yeah. I was like, you work government ethics, man. You talk to the White House. You should know a lot of this stuff. But there is a disconnect where if government ethics are established, are they going to follow those procedures? And how do you know exactly what is all going on? This has been my focus when it comes to the intelligence agencies. CIA spying on campus. The CIA is never supposed to activate domestically. But what they don't tell you is when they hire people on campuses, it sounds really cool to be CIA. What they don't tell you is that if you are involved overseas and you get caught, they have to cut off ties with you because you cannot be connected to the United States government. You cannot be a soldier under them. So now you have everything is all on you, and now you can get killed and they can't do anything about it. So there's a real inherent risk that people are not understanding when it comes to what our government does, ways our image of them, who they are, where general public just gets it through a news, and it's hard when news is captured, and news is captured when it comes to Tucker Carlson, Anderson Cooper, whoever. I think now they can talk about it, certain things that would get labeled conspiracy because they just blame it on the other side, which I'm like, at least they're talking about it for God's sakes. But still, nobody's being very, very transparent on the whole actions of what is fully going on in the situation, where people just get the news headline and then they move on to the next thing and they run with that story in their head. And that's very dangerous when it comes to what the ideas of a democracy are. I hate to say it, but I don't feel like we haven't been in a democracy for a very long time. It's been slowly, like I said, deep state. I'm 100% belief of that just because I've seen a lot of the actions that have not been checked. And if they do get talked about, it's so back in the past. I mean, how do you get someone to care about the Watergate hearings from like 40 years ago, 50 years ago? People don't care what happened last week. And I get it. Life is hard. Makes sense. But there's also a real thing about checking your own self in a sense when it comes to the government standard of ethics. And are we following these guidelines and protocols?
Well, first of all, regarding legality and morality, many people have pointed out that these drone strikes violate international law because they are not conducted according to the accepted international standards. Okay, so one example is the Geneva Conventions. Soldiers on the ground are not permitted to execute point blank unarmed persons. That's considered a war crime. When soldiers are on the ground, they have to take prisoners if it's possible to take them. So if an enemy soldier says, "Hey, I give up. Here are my arms. I'm laying them on the ground." The legal solution is not to go shoot him in the head. He has surrendered. He's no longer a threat to you. You're supposed to take him as a prisoner. What happens in drone strikes is that people who are often unarmed and are not threatening anyone with death are executed point blank. So it's very similar to the case of what would be considered a war crime by a soldier on the ground, but it's done from thousands of miles away. So there's no pretext of self defense possible. The soldier on the ground can say, "Oh, I thought he was going to pick up the weapon and kill me," and that's his excuse. and it may or may not be valid. He'll go through a trial, and they'll decide, did he actually commit a war crime or not? The fellow who executes someone point blank. But the drone operator is in a trailer in Nevada or somewhere. He is at no point is he at any danger when he pulls the trigger and kills someone thousands of miles away. So many scholars have pointed out that this is a violation of this whole practice in areas outside active hostilities where there are no soldiers on the ground to protect. This is a violation of international law. We are executing people without indictment or trial on the basis of sketchy intelligence. It's all circumstantial evidence. It's either human, bribed intel, or it's SIGINT, which is signals research. So signals intel. So it's like drone video footage, or it's SIM card data from cell phones. And on the basis of this circumstantial evidence, which would not hold up in a court of law in the United States, we're executing people. So what needs to happen is for people to go back and rethink the whole program. But unfortunately, because Obama did it for 8 years, it became normalized. So people now think that it's a totally normal thing to do for us to go kill people abroad. And all the president has to say is, oh, that was an evil terrorist. And that's the end of the story. They don't have to present the evidence because they're covered by state secrets privilege, which is one of the biggest problems that you just alluded to, that they can basically do anything they want, and then they don't have to explain it or provide the evidence because of state secrets privilege. So supposedly it's going to endanger the lives of U.S. Intelligence agents or whatever on the ground, or soldiers, if we reveal the details of the evidence. So even when Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S. citizen, was killed by drone by the U.S. government, when the government was court ordered to release documents explaining what happened, they redacted all of the evidentiary basis for the drone strike. So we actually have no idea why he was killed. He was in, I mean, aside from the standard line, which is he was an evil terrorist. But this is a guy who was a US citizen, and he actually spoke out against the crimes of 9/11. He was a moderate cleric at that point, and he was, according to Jeremy Scahill, author of Dirty Wars, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend, or watch his film, he was pursued by the FBI for some number of years, and he fled, and he eventually became sympathetic with the whole jihadist movement because he saw on the ground what was happening to his fellow Muslims in the Middle East. And so he started to become a propagandist for the jihadists. We don't know if he was ever actually an operational terrorist and he actually played a role in the killing of anyone. We don't know that. He was just taken out by a drone, by a missile launched from a drone. So that's another case where everything the government did was protected by state secrets privilege. And because Obama did this, Obama was the one who normalized assassination, even of US citizens. He was really given kind of the benefit of the doubt. I think if Trump had done it, there would have been a big uproar and people would have investigated more. But because Obama did it, he cleared the way for every subsequent president to do the same thing. So after, basically Trump inherited all of the executive powers which Obama had assumed when he decided that he could assassinate US citizens. And so Trump inherited that capacity, and now Biden has that capacity because it's almost like common law. It's like a common law. Instead of common law marriage, it's common law slaughter. So since Obama did it for 8 years, it's just considered to be that's what we do. But in fact, we never have had a debate about it. We never discussed the ethics or the morality, the ethics, morality, or legality of the practice. And now people just think it's what the government does. It's just a part of war. But in fact, what I try to show in my book is that it actually violates everything we supposedly stand for, all the principles we stand for in a so-called liberal democracy.
The example I would use is if one kid gets ice cream, the whole class gets ice cream. That's exactly what it is. But what
That's
would
right.
you?
It's very hard. It's very hard to roll back executive powers once they've been assumed, and once the populace has allowed them to be taken by the executive. So once the executive asserts, it's initially controversial, like, oh, Obama just killed a US citizen. But then once the populace gets on board and agrees with it, due to the propagandized media, so the only version of the story they hear is that he was an evil terrorist, and they forget all about things like habeas corpus and the presumption of innocence and the need for a jury by your peers, all these things that are written into our constitution. They forget about all of this, and then it's just like, oh, that's just what we do. That's just what the president does.
Have you thought of any precautions of where you would start if it came to just slow? Because trying to ban drone strikes is, I would say that's taken a large leap trying to do that for your first adjustment. I would take baby steps to get there, only because it's to them, it's like, no, they're going to use it. The other side's going to use it. And it's a lot of this paranoia that I started to notice, which is that if you're not doing it, the other government's doing it. So you better start doing it. It's like everybody's got a gun to everybody's head. And it's like this slow, wait till the pen drops situation. What I would suggest is, I mean, even with redaction of documents, stop redacting documents of people's names. If they're involved in it, they know it's messed up if they're only agreeing because their name's going to be taken out or it's going to be 60 years wait. I think that, I mean, that the implications of that sound very small, but I guarantee you a lot of people aren't going to want to be involved if their name is going to be attached to a document that's going to be found out in their lifetime, because they know the hell that social media or people are going to raise when it does get exposed. And I think that's a small step, kind of checking the powers of the government a little bit. I mean, the second would be like a church committee hearing again, but one that isn't so much of a whitewash. But that, like I said, that would even be a large leap to get there. You need not kind of need to more of a transparency or more exposure on a lot of the messed up stuff that the government does, at least not in independent researchers, but more in the general public's discussion.
hmm Well, we need to have a robust public debate about whether we should be doing this practice to begin with. I agree with you that the technology is not going to go away in actual war theaters because it has a use, which is to protect soldiers on the ground. Now, maybe soldiers on the ground should not have been there in Iraq, but once they were there, there was the force protection pretext. Whereas in this use of drones outside areas of active hostility, we're just basically killing people willy nilly. And you saw this in under Trump. Trump killed this General Soleiman. He just assassinated this guy. He was in Baghdad, an Iranian general, and he just assassinated him. And that's because he assumed the right and authority to be able to do that because of the authorities asserted by Obama. So this assassination was normalized by Obama. And so then when Trump came along and literally assassinated, I mean, he bragged about it. This general in Baghdad, this Iranian general in Baghdad, he just said, oh, yeah, he was a terrorist guy. He was plotting terrorist attacks. And then, the press just gave him a free pass. The only time the press ever liked Trump was when he was killing people, to be honest. But um, now to roll back this whole thing, I think what has to happen is we have to examine whether we would be okay with other countries doing what we do in their countries in our country. So Rand Paul actually tried to talk about this in a filibuster in 2013 when he opposed the nomination of John Brennan to the position of director of CIA. He asked specifically if the US government would be willing to use drones against US citizens on US soil. And the administration, for a while, they hemmed and hawed and suggested that, oh, they might do it. They hadn't done it yet, but they might do it. Well, that's a complete violation of our Constitution. And eventually, the Obama administration said, no, actually, we can't do that. So then the question is, well, why was it okay for you to do it in Yemen? There's no reason for believing that you couldn't have captured this guy. It's just that you wanted to assassinate him. And so we need to have a robust discussion about whether the government actually has the authority to do this. And it hasn't happened, mainly because most of the details of these cases are shrouded in mystery and secrecy. And again, as you mentioned earlier, the populace has basically signed off. They had just allowed government to take care of these issues. I
Well,
wrote an
they're not
essay.
specific about their terms when it comes to covert action. That it's like YouTube's guideline policy where YouTube won't tell you exactly what you said that got you flagged. It's an open door thing where it's like they're not going to tell you. So it's like when they say national security issues and they redact things, I'm looking through documents. I'm like, well, what's national security? It's like I could label this as a national security threat, and it's not a national
It's
security threat.
completely opaque, and that's actually a point that could be pressed by, some of our more critically minded legislators. We need to have transparency again. We need transparency again. I wrote an essay about this not too long ago called "To Save the Republic, Abolish the Black Budget." So I think one of the biggest problems we
Good luck.
have, I know that one of the biggest problems we have is this black budget because these people operate in a complete state of impunity. They can do anything they want with this money. We have no idea what they're doing, even though we pay for it as taxpayers. Um, and it's a free for all. And you have to ask, and I raised this question in my book, We Kill Because We Can, if it's supposedly acceptable now to execute people at a distance by remote control using these lethal drones, if that's above board now, that's all public. They announce it when they do it. What exactly is the government doing that can't be announced? And that's all the stuff that's done under the black budget. So it's actually very scary. It's like, what are they doing with, with all of this money? It's a huge amount of money. It's the black budget exceeds in magnitude the entire military budget of most other countries on the planet. And so we have to have transparency. It's the only way to, kind of reclaim our republic, in my view.
We've only had one president, and you can kind of look at all of them, but JFK was the only one that was really trying to reduce the size of the CIA and other
Yeah,
things that
look what
come into
happened
the.
to him.
I mean, that's why people think the CIA. I mean, I would probably stand in the boat that there's two types of people. There's people that did it, and there's people that covered it up. And there's plenty of evidence to show that you can only manipulate an autopsy if you're, involved in the government. But there's a serious thing when it comes to reducing budget size that he was doing towards the CIA. And then, I mean, that wasn't even exposed in the Watergate hearings. William Colby, when you look at what he did for the CIA, it puts a little bit more in context when I'm looking at a document that states that they had two other directors that were sitting besides Colby to make sure he wasn't too transparent. And people go to Watergate like, "Did you hear what come out about Watergate?" I was like, "Yeah, do you know what could have came out about Watergate if we would have actually had a real horrible event when it comes to opening up what the hell is going on in these institutions?" And they haven't been checked in a long time. I mean,
No, they haven't, and it's really frightening. And you mentioned earlier that each side, the Reds and the Blues, they try to, say that they're better than the other. In fact, they form a war party duopoly. They are a single behemoth at this point. It's when you look at the votes, for example, on allocations of resources to Ukraine, not a single progressive, so-called progressive legislator voted against sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. Well, progressive legislators supposedly care about domestic issues, right? But they decided they would just go along with the war machine. So it just shows you that we really have very few people in Congress who haven't already been co-opted. And that makes it really difficult. I don't know how we can get out of that. Term limits might be a possibility where you have more of a turnover, so you don't have like these legislators who have been completely co-opted by the industries, by the lobbyists for the military industry and also now the pharmaceutical industry, um, where you have some fresh minds, some young people who actually have not already accepted the way things are and are not committed to keeping things the way they are. Like there are very few people in Congress right now who are willing to risk their positions to actually affect change. And that's really sad.
there's a term for it in the intelligence community. It's called going native. It's about when you have a Cold War spy or someone doing espionage in another country, you have to rotate them out every 3 years to make sure that they don't become going native, which means like having a family. Those are giant red flags to the intelligence community. Our Supreme Court and people that have been in Congress, people that like spend life until they die on the bench. And I go, you think the president that has 4 years is going to have less power than, I mean, more power than the people that have been inside that business, knowing how the monster works from the inside? I mean, what is it? It's Robin Williams' joke where he goes, I wish politicians were like NASCAR drivers, where every single person that's sponsoring them would be labeled on their, their clothes.
Ah, yeah.
'Cause it's
Uh-huh.
true. There's a lot of people insider trading and things of that sort that are going
You
on
can
that.
find out actually who's being supported. So, for example, Biden received more contributions from the pharmaceutical industry than any politician in history. People don't know this. So he comes out and he's always, promoting the booster or whatever, the latest shot, even though he's had COVID like twice now and he's had like
Don't
six
say it. Don't
shots,
say
I
that.
think.
Don't say that. YouTube's gonna flag it. Don't say
Oh,
that.
sorry. Okay, sorry. We won't talk about that topic. But anyway, it's a good example of you can really see who supports these people. You can look at how they vote and then go do some research, and that is available. You can find out who is supported by who by which companies. You can find this out, but it takes some legwork. You have to look into it, but you can find it. It's just that because it's so pervasive, you can't, like in the case of the military, they like support everyone, so it's really hard to see how to get a wedge in the door, because if everyone is going to vote for every single thing that's called defense, no matter what it is, then you can't really get out of it, because no one's going to push for example, auditing the Pentagon, even though they've lost track, quote unquote, of trillions of dollars. So you might think, okay, so they've lost track of trillions of dollars, so why did we just give them $850 billion more? Like, why don't we make them um, find out where all that money went and tell us where that money went? But the presumption is, oh, they know what they're doing. It was probably just some clerical error. They lost trillions of dollars just
We
in
couldn't
good
even get
faith.
that out of Blasio. Blasio lost $850 million to a mental health fund, and he just was like, I don't know where it went. And I'm like, what? Show some damn receipts. Somebody do a damn court transaction.
Exactly. No, it's frightening. I mean, like, we know this. Like, every time they try to audit the Pentagon, they can't do it because it's just such a mess. They can't do it, and they can't figure out where literally trillions of dollars went. So, on top of the black budget, there's this whole like mystery money that's just floating around, that just got somehow siphoned into various avenues, and it's a lot of money. It's enough money to do anything that you might want to do. So,
We need more accountability to deter people from going more corrupt or making corrupt choices. Either way, and because I know I've spoken to people who've worked in the government and said, well, I mean, if they were paid a reasonable wage, like they're trying to justify insider trading or something like that, I'm like, well, hang on a second. You work for a government position. Your position goes over the fact of how much money you're making for that position. If you want a really good job, you could have just sold drugs, but you joined a government institution to be able to do so. So you are held accountable by those laws. But there really is no accountability when someone is being exposed of a certain crime. And even when we say the Pentagon, do we know specific names in the Pentagon? That's a very, very disconnected thing. I mean, Pentagon to me is like a deep state in a sense, only when it comes to the fact of I can blame the CIA for stuff, but people go, but who in the CIA? I go, but as an institution, you are held accountable and you're reliable or you're responsible for the people that you hold under you. So that means if you have one bad actor, the whole CIA, the whole agency needs to be talked to or be accountable for a lot of actions that are falling under that one person. Everyone keeps each other accountable in a sense, but that doesn't happen today. I mean, in anything that we do.
no, it's true. And I think that a big part of the problem is that there are some fresh faces who appear in Congress, but they are swiftly co-opted because of the institutional structure. So, now, as an example, when a group of progressive lawmakers finally wrote a letter expressing some concern about the magnitude of money that's being sent to Ukraine, the day after they issued this letter, they retracted it. Well, how did that happen? There's a mechanism there. And the most plausible explanation is that the dinosaurs of the party put pressure on them. Basically said, you're not going to have any funds for your reelection campaign, or something or other. We don't know exactly what happened, what went on in the sausage factory,
The
but
family
something
jewels.
happened. They wrote a letter, right? They wrote a letter, and then the very next day they retracted it. The letter's available. You can read the letter. It says they express, reservations about this. We have all these domestic problems. They retracted it the very next day. So the problem is that we have people like Pelosi and Mitch McConnell who have been there forever. Dianne Feinstein. There are a lot of them. They've been there forever, and they exert a lot of power in the respective parties, and they both have the same outcome, which is to support the military, industrial, congressional, media, academic, pharmaceutical, banking, logistics complex. That's what they do.
That's a
They get
big word. Holy
it's a
crap.
bit it's
Bravo to
well.
you.
Yeah, it's the MIC. It's the MIC, but it's the 21st century version of it. So it's expanded. It's octopoid at this point. There are 8 tentacles, And they're all interconnected. Have you read Nick Turse? Nick Turse has some good stuff. He has a book called The Complex, where he talks about how the military has seeped into every aspect of American life. So it's everywhere. It's in fast food. It's in Hollywood. Of course, you know that if you watched, the latest Top Gun Maverick.
Well, FBI invaded Hollywood a long time ago, and
Yeah,
started
a long time ago.
propaganda. Yeah.
So the point is, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's affecting our minds because you go watch a movie and you get this certain version of the story, and then you're unless you're a critical thinker, you're just going to kind of go with that. And so it all acts as a sort of supplementary propaganda to the news, which has also been
Well, critical thinking gets labeled as a conspiracy, which is really, really difficult. We've never been shamed in this society for asking a question. That was kind of taught through us through our education thing. And now
not until recently. Yeah.
one thing about like the whole capitalist involvement was there was so Pfizer got a where you couldn't sue Pfizer and they wanted to delay their documents by 75 years. They wanted to okay, so
Oh wait, you're getting on the topic now.
well, this is well
Just don't
publicly
say the C
known,
word. Don't say
but
the C word.
with Pfizer's relationship, the only reason they got an exception, and this is my own critical thinking that I started finding out, their name is not only mentioned in The Wolf of Wall Street when they talked about having a dinner where $25,000 worth went to strippers, and they said Pfizer. I had to rewind it and go, wait, what did you
Oh,
just
is
say?
that right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I clipped it and I sent it to Peter McCullough, and he's like, yeah, that's interesting. So when I back it up even farther, researching nuclear meltdowns, I was just interested in the topic and drifted into bioterrorism. I found the Vigo Ordnance Plant. If you Google what the Vigo Ordnance Plant is and look at what the description it gives for you, it was bought in 2001. It was an old bioweapons facility. It was bought by Pfizer. So I go, this relationship with this company, it's not surprising that they got an exemption when it comes to any accountability for any damage that is done to anybody. And the only reason is because
Yeah, they're extremely powerful. Yeah.
that relationship has been going on forever. And that's why all the other companies didn't get that exemption. It was just Pfizer because that relationship, and they plan probably on working with them in the future. So I start going, when you're covering your assets with no liability and you're not caring about the American people, that's another issue. And then you look at even with the JFK files, when you, and this is commonly known, you can look this up on the CIA's website. If you look at the way that they view Oliver Stone's movie JFK, an embarrassment to the agency, Watergate, William Colby embarrassing the agency, Garrison's attempts to embarrass the agency. When your government agencies are looking at you as you're going to embarrass us, that is not going to put you in a good standing, and that is not a government for the people. That is a government that has been on its own for a while.
Yeah, another example, Timothy Weiner's book, Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA. Excellent book. If you read that book, you will never think of the CIA in the same way again.
It's all of them. It's the FBI. It's
Yeah,
everything. They invaded
but when
Black
you
Panther
read
Party.
that when you read that book, you realize that Kennedy was right, that it should be broken to the agency should be broken into a million pieces and tossed into the wind, I believe was his quote. Because basically they've accomplished nothing but covering their asses for the last since their inception. And because they're protected by secrecy, there's no way to hold them accountable. They're completely protected.
The
It's like the ring
destruction
of
of documents is the worst. That's a routine thing they do. I'm like, what? What are we talking about? Digitize that shit.
no, it's awful. And it's like, we need like a wholesale, um house cleaning of this agency because of all of the negative stuff they've done. I mean, it's are they actually protecting us? We need like a really conscientious examination of whether they have helped us in any way or they have only harmed us. And but that hasn't happened again because Congress, as you said, is co-opted in so many different ways. So you mentioned Pfizer. The Albert Bourla, the CEO, he was like at Davos. He's a businessman. Why in the hell is
Coincidence.
he making government decisions? Why are
Coincidence.
any of the people there actually making government decisions? But I mean, it's incredibly powerful force at this point. I would say since the launch of Prozac in 1987, they became a very, very powerful force, the big pharma, and they've become more and more powerful because as they've made more and more profit, they've funneled that into lobbyists who get Congress on their side. So there are actually more pharma lobbyists in Washington D.C. than there are legislators, and this has to be reined in somehow. I think insider trading is one case where action can be taken. I think term limits are a case where action can be taken. But the problem is, they're already in there. So when you have these fresh faces who show up, they're basically apparently given ultimata. They either go along with the company line, or they don't get reelected because they don't have any funds. So basically, they primary people who will go along with the company line. So it's
We'll even stop advertising pharmaceutical drugs on television. We're one of 2 countries that do that. It's us and New Zealand. And the number of opioid deaths from the ages of 19 and 49 have been close to 100,000 in the past year or 2 years.
it was more than 100,000 in the last year. And on that topic, yeah, it's kind of shocking that people have disconnected the opioid crisis from the whole recent crisis, COVID, and so they suddenly decided that pharma is our savior, when in fact pharma was the cause of the opioid crisis. If you look at it, I mean, there's so many ways you can learn about this if you haven't already. Alex Gibney's film, The Crime of the Century, it's an HBO film. Have you seen that one?
Mm.
That covers the whole history of the opioid crisis and how this happened and how the FDA basically facilitated the mass overprescription of narcotics and the misleading advertising, misleading marketing, according to which these new products, OxyContin in particular, were not addictive. That actually caused the opioid crisis. So Alex Gibney's film, The Crime of the Century. Hulu also did a film on Dope Sick, which is a book, which also covers the whole history. But Americans they've compartmentalized the opioid crisis, where they don't realize that, in fact, that was caused by big pharma. And now they're like, oh yeah, big pharma, let's have some more boosters. So
Well, I
it's
mean,
really unbelievable.
it's crazy the type of manipulation they do to make you sure you can't talk about it. Certain names get labeled, you get blacklist somebody. I mean, you basically ruin someone's whole entire career. Where I go, look, if somebody's saying something about something, they're putting, especially in the opposite end of what the narrative is, they're putting their whole career and life on the line. I mean, I've had a person that helped with the malaria vaccine on my show, and he was very like, mandates are no, 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 no. And it's a big thing when it comes to, you need transparency, not only in your health industry, but the health industry has to have a good relationship with the people. It needs to be effective ways of communication. There wasn't that at all. But a recommended video for you, 1971 video of Hale Boggs. Hale Boggs was a part of the House Select Committee on House Unselect Committee that was investigating a bunch of the FBI and stuff. But this is the funny thing is, so we know about Hoover in 74 after Hoover dies. He was wiretapping people, he was blackmailing people, he was basically investigating people like congressmen and all this type of stuff. In 71, Boggs gets on in an AP News video, and he's sitting there saying Hoover's doing all these things like wiretapping congressmen, blackmailing politicians, all these types of things. And the reporter goes, "It sounds like a conspiracy. What's your evidence?" And he goes, "Well, the only evidence you're going to get, and it's kind of counterintuitive, which is you're going to have the FBI investigate the FBI." He goes, "So that's why it's not going to come out." And then 72, Boggs' plane goes missing over Alaska. And then 74, all that stuff in that video where he labeled it all out there. He said, "This will come out." It all gets exposed. And I go, see, that's the issue of when you label something a conspiracy theory and you don't let people talk about things without following up with an investigation. I think there needs to be like nonprofit organizations, people that are dedicated to actual transparency, that are investigating the FBI, the CIA, and also clarify your terms on national security, because that's really pissing me off because I don't know what that means. I still don't. And I've talked to federal judges who've explained it.
No, it's a blanket term which is used as a cover for anything. So basically, we can get away with murder because of national security. Basically, it's like. Did you ever read Plato's Republic, The Ring of Jesus? So it's a ring, you put it on, and you become invisible. So you could commit crimes without anyone knowing. And this is
Oh,
what they have. They have the equivalent of this ring of Jesus. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. I don't know Greek, but anyway,
Jesuits?
it's Gyges. Don't know how to pronounce it, but anyway, it's a ring that makes you invisible. And so basically you become uh, able to commit crimes with total impunity. And that's what these agencies have, these highly secretive agencies. And they tell themselves, oh, well, we meant to do well. Mistakes were made. That's what they say to themselves. That's how they sleep at night. But in the meantime, all these bodies are falling to the wayside, because of their like cockamamie schemes. And again, I can't recommend Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes enough for people who don't know about the history of the CIA.
There needs to be, especially if we talk about bring it back kind of to the drone strike thing, which is the where we're leading into is going to be fully autonomous weapons. When that start, and it's some of it has been implemented in very small steps, but when it fully leads there, which the direction of technology stopping is not going to happen, so it's going to go there. There needs to be a real discussion, a clear outline of guidelines that all governments have to make. It needs to be legislature, it needs to be something when it comes to following proper procedures, when it comes to using fully autonomous weapons in war. I mean, because when you start leading towards weaponry, which is going to be the main focus, it starts hitting domestically, which comes into not only with riots, but it also comes into fully autonomous vehicles. I mean, I had a guy talk about level 5 autonomous vehicles on my show who works in for a company that studies autonomous vehicles. And I was asking him, I was like, what's like the dangers of like, how do you like imagine if I want to go out to my car, like what would stop me from using my fully autonomous car? He goes, if you break a law. And I go, hold on, there's some dumb fucking laws. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, connecting to someone's Wi-Fi network is a law. You can't do that. And I guarantee to you, everyone has done it once in their life or more than that on a daily basis. And I go, what happens about like the whole like I didn't pay a bill and I miss a payment? Does that count? And he goes, I mean, it could. And I'm like, so I can't use my car to go to my job to make more money to pay the bill that I didn't pay in the first place. And he goes, well, there's a lot of things that are going to be worked out. I go, are you sure? Because there's a real ethical questions you need to start asking. It's like we need to be ahead with legislature and then keep expanding when it does get implemented.
Yeah, well, the problem is that we've already crossed this line where we just disregard the so-called human rights of civilians on the ground. So, for example, it used to be that collateral damage was considered acceptable because there was no way to avoid it. So you have soldiers on the ground; they don't actually want to kill civilians, but in fact, the civilians were in the way and they had to protect themselves, and so they ended up killing some civilians. What's happening now is they rebranded assassination so that you can use missiles in countries where there are no soldiers on the ground. And this means that we've increased the ability of the military to produce so-called collateral damage, even though the pretext for collateral damage has evaporated away. The pretext was that you had to protect soldiers on the ground. That's no longer there. So now it's that we can kill civilians on the ground because there are no soldiers on the ground, and that's supposed to be okay. So that's a really slippery slope. So you're going to see the same thing coming into domestic context, as you said, as robotics are taken up by police forces. So I'm sure you've seen RoboCop. There are two good versions of it, 1987 and 2014. They're both really
The
good
new one's really
versions.
good. I like that
Yeah,
one.
actually, they're both really good, and they both focus on slightly different things. So,
When they show him his body with all like this the robot parts taken out off of him in the new one, that was impactful. That scared me.
yeah, so the only thing that we can do at this point is to point out how these practices actually violate laws that are already on the book. So you can't just execute people like in the manner of RoboCop on suspicion that they might be going to commit a crime, although that is happening. So a good example of this, the first use of a robotic device was against I think his name is Mika Xavier Johnson. Anyway, the Dallas cop killer. So he was killing a bunch of cops. He was angry, a veteran, African American veteran who was angry about the cops killing black men in the country. And so he went on a killing spree, killed six policemen in Dallas. And instead of using a robotic device to, for example, knock him out, they could have used some sort of anesthetic, some sort of drug that would cause him to pass out. Instead, they blew him up. They blew up this guy using a robotic device. So that's a really good example where there was a human rights choice there. They could have stopped this guy using the same device, using a non-lethal drug. Instead, they blew him up. So if we normalize this idea that you just blow people up, I mean, it's true. In this case, he had committed a crime. He had killed these people. But instead of like finding out why, they just wiped him off the face of the earth. Like instead of trying to understand like why this guy probably had PTSD, may have been on psych meds, who knows? But anyway, he went on this rampage killing policeman. They just blew him up, which is so ironic because the whole basis of his anger was that police had been killing black men, willy-nilly, who were suspected of crime. That's a good example where if that becomes normalized, where policemen think that you shoot to kill, you don't shoot to incapacitate, and it looks like we're going in that direction, then when the robots come out, it's going to be exactly like RoboCop, where you just kill people, there's no question of human rights, even though in the case of a robotic device, the pretext for killing in self-defense has evaporated away in the way that the use of the drones outside areas of active hostilities no longer involves a case of self-defense. Soldiers on the ground can conceive of themselves as killing in self-defense. Drone operators in trailers in Nevada cannot. So we've crossed over a line already by using these devices in places where there is no pretext of force protection available.
We need a live court proceeding that's like a full week where every station has to play this, and it has to be this one court hearing with no commentary, just exactly what's going on. That lets out all these ethical abuses, human rights questioning, a bunch of stuff. Just so, I mean, if you don't catch one day of it, you got the whole damn week to try and catch at least a little bit of it. I mean, more people watch the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, and I'm just like, look, you can make it that interesting, but you have to kind of be honest about your shit a little bit when it comes to the government's abuses, which is like the biggest thing to ask from them. But real ethical concerns from researchers or independent scholars or people that have done way more work, whether they're researchers or not, but just have been passionate about the subject to bring up serious ethical concerns. I mean, the government should be asking and looking for academics to be raising these questions that they possibly couldn't think of in the heats of the moment. But it got really quick with just whenever there's a problem, push it away, get rid of it, or neutralize it. And that's been the same method, whether it comes to treating diseases. It's a torch it all field method. And it's like that worked for a while, but did it actually work? It was like we really just built up the problem, and now the problem and our solution for that is not really effective anymore. So it really brings up huge concerns where you feel like the government should be reaching out to nonprofit organizations and people that are really raising like you raised really good points on a lot of things. Like people should be examining your work and looking, I mean, just these asking questions for you, like, hey, do you have an idea on this? What would you suggest? I mean, that's not that hard for the government to do, for God's sakes. I feel like they spend more time investing into something they shouldn't be invested into rather than something they probably should.
Well, it's very complicated because there are a lot of financial forces involved, and so they don't really want to expose their incompetence. First of all, government bureaucrats in general don't want to reveal their incompetence. So
Why?
basically,
Why?
because they want to keep their position. I mean, it's just it's prudence from the perspective of the individual person who's cemented into the government and has like a permanent position. They don't want to reveal their mistakes, and they got where they are by going along with the company line. So basically, anyone who disagrees gets weeded out at a entry level. So you can't get a job at CIA if you don't already agree that drone killing is a good thing, right? So that's
Wait,
it.
so me talking trash on the CIA is going to stop me from getting a job? But they said they'd accept
No,
everybody.
no, they'll never accept you
Damn.
because you're asking questions that cannot be asked. So basically, there's this weed out process from the very beginning. When they go recruit people from high school or colleges, they're not going to accept anyone who has reservations about assassinating people by remote control in countries where there are no soldiers on the ground. That they're going to weed those people out. So the only people who get into the agency or into the administrative levels of the Pentagon are people who agree with what they're already doing. So it's institutional conservatism which comes into play here. It's very complicated. It's not just a matter of financial, profiteering. It's also institutional conservatism. So the only people who get in already agree with what they're doing. So if you don't agree, you can't get in. And then if you don't do a good job at what they've all agreed is the right thing to do, then you'll never advance. So basically, the people who advance to become managers and leaders in the drone program are going to be the people who kill the most people, who do the best job, who do it unflinchingly, who don't ask the questions, the entanglement of moral and ethical questions and legal questions involved. And so what happens is then the public looks to the the so-called authorities, the experts in these institutions for guidance. And what do they tell them? They tell them exactly what the institution itself wants them to say because they actually believe it. That's how they got there. So it's very, very complicated. You're not going to get people at the highest level of government who are asking these sorts of questions because they would have never been hired. Because if they have any skeptical, cells in their brain, they're not going to be accepted into this whole colossus.
It's a complicated issue. I hate to say it like that, but it leaves you in points where it's like, it's kinda seems hopeless. I mean, I know
No,
there's, like,
don't
suggested
say
methods,
that.
but
Yeah, I know it sounds hopeless, but like as long as we have free speech, we're okay. If we give up our free speech, it's over. It's
that starts
completely
with the
over.
disinformation board. There's so much of that
That's
going out
oh,
there already. I'm like,
absolutely,
"Damn it."
absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And it was really frightening that people were accepting this. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's a good thing." And
Google
then when it
cares about me. I'm like, "No, they don't. Don't say that. Don't ever say that."
yeah. No, it's hilarious and it's so misguided and it's so epistemologically suspect. I mean, you can't appoint one person as the head of the DGB who's going to, decree what is the truth. That's just tyranny right there. That's totalitarianism, actually. Totalitarianism is, you have a central government authority who says what you are entitled to believe. That's Orwell right there, 1984. So, and the fact that we're moving in that direction is very frightening because people in the populace are agreeing with it out of fear. Again, so fear is manipulated. So people are afraid. Like if we have all these dissidents asking questions, then people won't do what they're supposed to do and then all be in danger. So they manipulate the fear and then people go along with it and legislators vote for these things and for some of the same reasons, self-interested reasons. They want to keep their positions, for example. And then it starts to look hopeless. I agree. But as long as we, you know, stand our ground and don't give up our freedom of speech, that's like a red line. We can't give up freedom of speech. That's the most fundamental factor in a democracy. If we don't have freedom of speech, we have nothing. If we don't have bodily autonomy, we have nothing. So basically, we have to stand our ground on these things and just carefully and soberly explain why these are violations and why the government has gone too far when they try to usurp our rights in these areas. It's difficult, but we have to do it. Otherwise, we're just marching toward totalitarianism.
I feel like, with a lot of the stuff, like, when I say government guidelines kinda keep getting moved. I mean, if you look at, like, the disinformation board, I think people are on board with it just because of the fact that they think it's gonna limit the opposite view. It's gonna limit them from stopping those right-wing conspiracies or left-wing propaganda type things. I go, "No, no, it's gonna come for you. It's gonna be something you're going to say." Once I got flagged on one episode, I started getting flagged on a bunch of stuff, and I realized, okay, once you step on the spider web, you realize where the spider web is and how far it extends out. And really, they can just broad brush it on anything. But I appreciate the time, Laura, you gave me to talk on my show. I'm going to link your links in the description, but would you like to say your links off real quick for everyone out there listening?
Sure. The Drone Age WordPress.com is my blog. And then I have uh, a whole slew of essays on the Libertarian Institute, and you can find them by putting Libertarian Institute dot I think it's org/L Calhoun. Anyway, you can just search for me and then all my essays will come up there. And my books are listed also at both my blog and at the Libertarian Institute. And yeah, great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
That's two libertarian institutes I know about now. I know EFF is one, Electric, what is it? Something Freedom. Jacob Hornberger runs it. It's a pretty good one. But I'm going to link yours in there and I'm going to check that one out for sure
Yeah,
too.
let me tell you what. Yeah, ours is org. Ours is libertarianinstitute.org. Oh, actually, my name is on the banner. So you can just click on Laurie Calhoun at the very top of the website, and then you can find all my essays there. And next to my essays is a list of my books. So my latest essay is, oh, I'm not supposed to mention that word.
Was it
Okay,
don't
so
do, wait, was it? Oh, the code.
well, it doesn't say anything. It's kind of neutral. It says the meaning of the COVID-19 vaccine mandates in 2023. But I have lots of articles here about war, drone killing, everything relating to our liberty, actually,
There'll be
freedom.
a new essay up called "Don't Do Podcasts with 25-year-olds." I got you.
No,
I'm
no, no, no,
kidding.
no, no. You're doing great. It's really admirable that you're so active on this. So that's
My goal is for the government to get me in like one of those weird accidents, like a throat chop. I'm
Oh,
telling you.
don't say that. No. Or a single car accident, Michael
Yeah.
Hastings, you know.
Oh
So
my goodness. There's 4 throat chops in the suspicious deaths on the Kennedy assassination. And they're like very, very detailed on it, where I'm like, how do you step out of the shower and get a chop to the back of the there was one that was a brain hemorrhage and there was no autopsy performed. I'm like, who was the monk detective that waved his hands over that person's head to be able to detect a brain hemorrhage? I'm just that's a whole different subject. But Laurie, I'm gonna link all your links in the
okay,
description.
wonderful.
Pleasure
Okay.
chatting with you. And
I think
thanks
you're
for listening to
safe
this
for
episode.
now as long as you don't have too many followers. Okay. So
But thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank and stay tuned for next.